The Russians just had a pretty humiliating experience in Crimea. The Russians lost another, and I do want to say another, landing ship, and we're going to talk about how many landing ships they've lost so far in the war with Ukraine in the last 24 hours. And this was not the only ship. Originally, it was reported as the only ship, but a few hours before stream started, we also found out that another ship was also destroyed in the explosion. I do have a graph here to show you the type of ship that was destroyed. It is a Rapucha class landing ship. What these ships do, this is from Offbeat Research, which is a publication I work with. It was made by a friend of mine there. Good people over there. You should go check them out. I've written for them before, so if you want to check out my articles with them, I'd recommend it. I'd recommend it because that Dylan guy seems cool. Anyway, what these ships do is they transport large amounts of equipment and possibly troops as well. As you can see from the graph, this type of vehicle, this type of boat can transport up to 10 tanks with 340 troops, or potentially 12 BTRSs with 340 troops. And so if there was ever a scenario where the Russians say were blockaded in Crimea because the Kerch Bridge was destroyed and they were cut off by, let's say, a successful Ukrainian counteroffensive, or if the Kerch Bridge was destroyed, period, this would probably try to pick up the slack, especially in a blockade scenario where boats like this would become necessary to maintain Crimea and to be able to continue the occupation without submitting to the Ukrainian siege, which would be straining their logistics and supply. So ships like this would be very necessary. They just do not have the means to transport enough goods and weapons and stuff to hold the island through airlift. And if they did do it through airlift, that also comes with its own risks. This is how it was attacked. It was attacked in the port of Feodosia. I'm sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. It's in southeastern Crimea. It's way from the coastline in Odessa. The reason why they're putting ships over here is they're trying to avoid the naval drones, the sea babies that the Ukrainians designed domestically that they've been launching at ships to take out transport ships, to take out submarines, patrol boats, take out all sorts of stuff. And they found some success. And the Russians, in response to that, have pulled back their naval forces from the coastline, allowing the Ukrainians to create some sort of grain corridor so the Russians can try to preserve their Black Sea fleet, because they have an agreement with Turkey and all nations that have this agreement with Turkey in order to get ships into the Black Sea, that during wartime they would not transport military ships into the Black Sea. So whatever ships they have in the Black Sea now is just the ships they got. And so when they lose the flagship of the Black Sea fleet, the Moskva, and they get sunk near the start of the war, and then this ship, then that ship, then that ship gets sunk, it could really lead to a situation where they've lost a decent chunk of their Black Sea fleet, allowing the Ukrainians to operate more openly on the open seas in the Black Sea, but also disabling the Russians' ability to use the sea to launch Kinzhal missiles at Ukrainian cities. That's just a few of the reasons as to why. There's a bunch of other elements, but the way that the Ukrainians target it was by using some of the most advanced aircraft in their air force, Su-20s, Su-24s, and attaching Storm Shadow missiles to them after they've been retrofitted in order to use the British provided long-range missile. And then the two aircraft, assumingly, well, one aircraft, who knows how many aircraft specifically, but I would assume now, since we know that two ships were destroyed, two aircraft were loaded up with these missiles, flew in Ukrainian airspace, launched it, and were able to hit both the transport ship and a training ship. Let me actually show you guys the training ship here that was destroyed. This is an old training ship. It's not extremely valuable, but hey, it still counts. If you guys wondered what it looks like when a transport ship gets destroyed, one that is now assumed to have been carrying artillery shells, Shahed drones, and other munitions, what it looks like when it gets blown up after, you know, working basically as a floating ammo dump.
Садись. Тихо, тихо. Ты снимаешь? Да. Охренеть. Ой, жарко сюда.
Вот зря мы сюда пошли, там осколки прилетят.
Поэтому говорю, голову.
Нифига себе. Тихо, ты чё?
Man. God, man, that's a gigantic explosion. So yeah, the rumor is that the ship was full of artillery shells. I've seen some numbers floating around, like 4,400, but who knows? And Shahed drones. But I mean, I saw that explosion. You guys saw that explosion. This transport ship was carrying Russian weapons. It absolutely was carrying Russian weapons. You can also see from the satellite photos, we have more recent satellite photos from after the explosion, that you can see both in the red highlighted square, the ship that was sunk, because the Russians are saying that these ships were damaged, right? No, these ships were blown to high hell. Whoever was on the ship, there's a good chance that the vast majority of those people are dead or horribly injured. And there were reports of ambulances scrambling on the ground. But you can see in the red square here from an immediate after shot through a satellite photo that the transport ship was destroyed. And in the yellow square, that is the ship that was identified earlier today as a training vessel, an older Soviet era training vessel that the Russians had at the base in Crimea as well. And again, it's not as valuable as a transport ship, but hey, still counts, especially to a nation without a navy. This explosion was so massive, by the way, that pieces of the ship were thrown all across Crimea, and I assume into the water as well, but thrown all across Crimea and embedded itself in the ground in these gigantic chunks of metal that just spiraled across the peninsula. Look at this. This is incredible. And this is not just like one piece. There's a bunch of pieces.
В окрестностях Феодосийского порта можно встретить множество фрагментов большого десантного корабля «Новочеркасск». Сегодня ночью он получил повреждения. Вот такие достаточно крупные фрагменты можно встретить в Феодосии. Такой элемент, он, кстати, попал в землю, буквально вот почти на метр вошел. Представляете, с какой силы был удар, и вот в домах окрестных пятиэтажных.
Do we know if the transport ship was fully destroyed or just damaged? That ship was destroyed. The Russians say it was damaged. Bullshit. They're lying to you. Look at this. There's pieces of the ship, like a kilometer to 2 kilometers away from the ship, that were thrown off due to the size of the explosion. You guys saw the size of the explosion. It was massive. It was one of the largest explosions I've seen for the entirety of the war. That ship was carrying artillery shells or Shahed suicide drones that they were going to throw at apartment blocks. That ship is gone. And it's underwater. We've seen the satellite photos. It is no longer buoyant. If you are on that ship, I'm sorry to say, you're probably underwater right now. Here is some more pieces of fragment that have been found at other locations, and smashed windows across Crimea from again the size of the explosion. And when I say smashed windows, that doesn't mean like pieces of shrapnel hit the windows. It could just mean that just the sound waves and you know, were enough to smash the glass, as we can see here and here and here. And here's more shrapnel that flew across Crimea, landing on the sidewalk. Here's some security cam footage from the explosion. Man. You guys get the idea. So when trying to analyze it, okay, and here's even more. God, man, there was so much thrown across the peninsula. Anyway, these are the ships that the Russians have lost. Now, this list does not include the recent loss in the Black Sea fleet, which is the transport ship we just talked about and that training vessel. But this is what they've lost up to this point. The Moskva, which was the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet, landing ship Saratova, large amphibious assault ship Novochursk. Wait, I think that's... No, actually, no, this does include it. This is the ship right here. So I didn't even attempt to pronounce the name of the ship because I'm sorry, I'm just not that good. But that is the ship. So this is included on the list. I don't think it includes the training ship. That was what it doesn't include. Landing ship Olegiy Goranki, landing ship Minsk, medium reconnaissance ship, an attack submarine, a scene-going minesweeper, a rescue tug, an anti-saboteur ship, 2 Serena-type landing craft, a landing boat, a D-704 landing boat, 6 patrol boats of the Raptor project, and 2 patrol boats, Tunets. This all comes together, according to the UK Defense Secretary, to make up 20% of the Russian Black Sea Fleet that has been destroyed. 20% of the Black Sea Fleet destroyed, according to the UK defense minister. That's a lot. That's especially a lot for a nation, again, who no longer has a navy and immediately lost its navy at the start of the war. And yet, over almost 2 years later, well, it's almost 2 years later since the 2022 invasion, and the Russians are still losing landing craft. The Russians are still losing transportation boats, still losing tugboats, patrol boats, and now have lost 20% of their Black Sea fleet. And again, I need to emphasize this. According to deals with the Turks that have been made by all parties involved, the Russians cannot transport more military ships into the Black Sea. Not while this war is going on. And as long as that is the case, the Russians are stuck with what they got left. And this is what they got left. Here is a list. It was collected by Herman Curran. And when I say Herman Curran, he was the person who's like crossing out these and like updating the list for losses and stuff like that, which we just saw a different one listing those losses. This is what's left of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. So 20% is a lot. As you can see, like if you look at the Rachpa, the class landing ships, like losing 4 of these now with the recent one, losing 4 of these is significant. That means they've lost almost half of their landing ships of this class. They've also lost amphibious warfare landing ships, meaning in total they've lost 5 ships that could be used to transport troops, munitions, food, or whatever else would be necessary to sustain Crimea. And I do have to say, it's not hard to see the Ukrainian logic of targeting ships that could be used to sustain Crimea in the event that the Kerch Bridge is destroyed, because they would not have enough to transport it by air. I mean, there's a basic desire here to try to, again, force the Russian Black Sea Fleet to destruction of the Moskva and destruction of its ships back so they can have that grain corridor and they can operate more in the sea. But that specific element does have to be considered when we're talking about this ship in particular, which in a scenario where the Kerch Bridge is destroyed, this is one of the ships that would have been transporting munitions and food and whatever else is necessary to Crimea in order to maintain it during a potential Ukrainian siege. Obviously, the Russians reacted to this as well. As much as the Russians have in the past tried to ignore tragedies if they could, depending on how large they were. And when I say tragedies, I mean tragedies to them. This one was just large enough. The explosion was too big for the residents of Crimea to ignore. And so the Russians did put out a quick comment on the Ukrainians damaging the ship. According to them, they didn't admit to it being destroyed, even though we know it's destroyed. This was their response on Russian state TV. Their transport infrastructure is now operating as normal. The head of Crimea has said this. He clarified that during the enemy attack on the town, 1 person died. 1 person. There was 1 person in the ship. 1 person. In both ships. With all of those munitions on it. They just left all those munitions in the ship, just floating in the water with nobody to look after them. Must have been the cook. 6 buildings were damaged and windows were blown out, as has been reported by the news agency citing the defense ministry. The armed forces of Ukraine attempted to attack the large landing ship, and 2 Ukrainian Su-24s were destroyed by air defense systems. We don't have any evidence of this. At least we don't have any video evidence or physical evidence, and the Russians haven't provided anything of this. In short, Zelensky once again proved his terrorist essence. Blowing up a transport ship probably full of suicide drones that are going to be launched at civilian infrastructure, calling that terrorism, considering what the goods on that ship were going to be used for, is a little bit too on the nose.